You're listening to the Fezcast, produced on behalf of the Saracen Supporters Association and featuring the independent thoughts, rants and rambles of Saracens fans and special guests. If you'd like your opinion to be heard on the show, you can find the Fezcast on Facebook or Fezcast_SSA on Instagram and whatever Twitter is known as these days. But for now, enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Fezcast. Episode 7, I think it is, isn't it, Matt?
It is. Not lost count yet.
It's me, Matt and Barry, talking about what's gone on the weekend. Plus, in the middle of that, we're the bread to a sandwich bidder, where I've had a chat with an absolute belting interviewee, a club legend. I mean, 470 games to the club. Floyd Steadman, OBE, spoke to me last week prior to the weekend. So, a bit of our conversation kind of like got thrown it's a bit out of date, but still, it was a lovely conversation we had with Floyd, wasn't it, Matt?
It was, yeah. No, everyone really should be looking forward to listening to that. So, what do you want to do, mate? Do you want to go straight into it and do some nice stuff first, or do you want to talk about the misery of the weekend?
Well, let's get the misery out of the way, I think, because I think we need to talk about the World Cup and obviously what's happened there. But I don't know, Barry. I think bowling out Exeter for 65 all 10 wickets isn't bad going, is it, Barry?
Well, no. I mean, some silly so-and-so at the Premiership Rugby website has put the table upside down. I mean, I just can't get over it. Do they not double-check these things anymore? Is there no sub-editing?
It is. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, obviously, I didn't see the game, and I think probably I've done the right thing. They're not seeing the game. I haven't even gone to look back at the highlights, but one of those games, I suppose, Matt, isn't it? Smalley made mention of it in his interview as well, didn't he? He said, it's happened to us before. I think we remember getting tongued by wasps one season. We still went on and won it that year, but I mean, that was a rude awakening, wasn't it, Matt?
Very, yeah. I was sort of going to try and talk about Saracens' performance, but actually, I think the fair comment really is that there wasn't one. We just didn't turn up at all, and I think there's no getting around it. It's probably the worst Saracens performance I've certainly seen in my life as a Saracens fan. It's worse than those two big losses against Wasps. I know, we've had one of them was sort of during COVID, and as we got done for the salary cap, and we just chucked it in for the rest of the season, and then the Valentine's Day massacre as well. But this performance against Exeter was worse than that, and nobody's hidden away from it. Like you say, Mark McCall had plenty to say. I think it's fair to say that Exeter as well were very, very good. We gave them every chance they needed to be very, very good. And it's nice to see our esteemed colleague Sam is still doubling down on his theory that Exeter are going to finish bottom this season. But look, I think we learn from this match in hindsight. I think how we respond to it and how we perform against Bath, and perhaps more so the next away fixture that we play, I think that is more of a test of what this loss actually does for us. But yeah, it was bloody awful, Barry.
Yeah, can't really argue with that. The only thing, I mean, yes, we've had these results before. The only thing that did worry me on this one was that there seemed to be a lack of leadership on the pitch. There didn't seem to be anyone getting hold of the players and saying, "Look, what are we doing here? This isn't good enough. This isn't us." And that did worry me slightly. And talking about the next away game, I mean, that's an easy enough assignment, Gloucester.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? That and it goes back to when we discussed what had happened in the season so far with Dan Vickers, and they made all the right noises at that time, but those right noises have got to be backed up with actions, and it hasn't been this week. And I think they'll admit that, and they'll admit that as much as anything. But you go for a Premiership Cup competition with your superstars away, yeah, fair dues, but all clubs have lost some players. You know, we brought back in two lads who've been away at the World Cup in Marco and Theo. Made no difference. I just don't think the preparation of the season has been right. Has somebody taken their eye off the ball a little bit? Or is it just circumstances have meant that, you know, things haven't gone right? The big concern is now that, you know, as we'll discuss in the third part, England have got through, so those players are away now for another 2 weeks, with the likelihood that they're going to need an appreciable time off afterwards because of the intensity that they're now playing at. Could we, you know, you can't lose a season in one game. You can't win a league championship in one game. You could go a long way to causing yourself enough problems later on. And if it's going to be 6-8 weeks before we've got players back at full strength, at full speed, this could be a dodgy season for us if we don't buck our ideas up soon.
Yeah, I think the point you've made there about one game doesn't make a season is something that I definitely want to pick up on, because I've seen people we know quite well on social media through running the Fezcast. There's been people that have said there's players that were playing against Exeter that should never wear the shirt again. Now that, quite frankly, is ridiculous. It's one match. It's a one-off, hopefully. If we're still talking in this way in 3, 4, 5 weeks' time, then maybe we've got a case for that. But such a big reaction to one loss that we've very, very rarely seen as a Saracens fan. I think we just need to have a bit of a level head at the moment. But I do agree with you that it does look like we're undercooked, and that is pretty poor considering there has been a 4 or 5 game Prem Cup on the run. So, you know, we don't know what's going on in the background. We don't know what's going on in training. We don't know what the coaching team's plan is. Sometimes these things just do happen and you can prepare really well, and all of a sudden things just go really, really tits up. I mean, the one comparison that I can draw fairly recently, Jez, is the game that you and I were at, the women's game against Gloucester at home, when absolutely everything went wrong. No one looked at the races whatsoever, and we were standing there thinking, what on earth is going on? Now, Gloucester went on to win the league this season, and it did turn out that in that game, actually, most of the girls were on the bog 5 minutes before the game. So there was that going on in the background. You know, we don't know. But yeah, let's just wait and see what happens in the next few games.
Well, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? We've got some games coming up. The reaction is what we're going to be looking for, Barry. And if there is no reaction, then obviously, you know, but to pick up on what Matt said there is also, I think, from a lot of the fan base, a sense of entitlement that's quite natural because we've got used to winning stuff. And when it doesn't quite go right, you know, the reaction often is surprise, shock, whatever it may be. We've seen it in the Rugby World Cup, certainly with France and Ireland on the weekend. You know, you get used to winning, and then when you do get a thumping, it's very hard to take. You know, if you're Bath who've taken thumpings after thumpings after thumpings, they're used to it. You know.
Yeah, it's been. I do have some sympathy with people being slightly spoilt with our recent success. But yeah, I mean, for me, all of those players are still in massive amounts of credit, or are just literally putting their first, you know, taking their first steps on their Saracens journey. So no brickbats from me. It was one of those games. It didn't work out. Let's see how we bounce back on Saturday. Let's hope we bounce back on Saturday, and we'll take it from there. Yeah, if we haven't won in the next 3 or 4 weeks, then we'll come back and revisit it, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I don't think there's a major problem there. It was just one of those things that didn't work out. We did improve in the second half, it has to be said, but then that was quite a low bar. I think I could have tripped over that one, to be quite honest with you.
Absolutely. Look, let's move on from there. Well, you know, we've touched on it. We have to touch on it. We don't want to dwell on it. What we do want to dwell on is a club legend who I spoke to last week. Thoroughly enjoyed. A really engaging personality, a fabulously honest person who's got so much to tell us. So we might as well let him do that and hand over to myself and Floyd Steadman OBE. And then we'll have a quick chat about that afterwards, and we'll do the World Cup as well.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Hi, Alex Osterbury here, Director of Rugby for Saracens Women. You're listening to the Saracens Fezcast.
This is the Fezcast.
Well, I'd like to welcome to the Fezcast an absolute legend of Saracens, but not only a legend of Saracens, but also someone who's had an amazing life in education and also in rugby, but also, Black History Month. We're joined by a man who's played 469 times for Saracens, been a very successful career in education after his time there, been awarded honours by, the royal family, an OBE no less. Floyd Steadman, welcome to the Fezcast. We really have been looking forward to speaking to you for a long, long time.
Jez, thank you very much indeed. And I can see that you've done your homework. I feel very, very humbled. And thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
Well, absolutely, Floyd. First things first, actually. Before we drill down into your life and your time with Saracens and everything like that, you enjoying your rugby at the moment? You've been watching the World Cup, I assume?
Enjoying is possibly not the right term, but look, the bottom line is this. I say to people, that 3 or 4 months ago, people saying England weren't going to get out of the pool. We've topped the pool. We're playing Fiji in a quarterfinal, and we have a more than realistic chance of making the semi-final, and that's got to be a result.
Well, absolutely. I said that much the same on last week's Fezcast when Barry, my colleague, asked me what's success, and I think a semi-final is successful given where they were coming from, and perhaps builds us into the next World Cup cycle quite nicely, doesn't it, Floyd?
It does, and I've heard rumours that the coach is going to be bold and perhaps put Smith at fullback.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I have actually been critical of Marcus Smith in the past as a standoff at international level, but I've seen him actually knuckle down and work hard, and I think he adds something to that. With Owen at 10, obviously, and that's something we said there. But also, obviously, I can see, the people listening to the podcast can't see, but we're both coloured up, as it were. You've got your Saracens top on. Obviously, you still follow the men in black from afar now because you're down in Cornwall, obviously.
Oh, yeah. I now live in West Cornwall, and I know we're going to get on to why I moved down to West Cornwall. But the first result I always look for, of course, is the Men in Black, the Saracens. And I'm incredibly lucky because as well as being an ex-captain and in the Hall of Fame and a vice president, I do get invited up to a number of the home games in London, but also the away games that are home games for me if they're playing at Exeter or Bristol or Bath.
Well, indeed. Well, we're recording this on the Thursday before the Premiership season kicks off. So are you going to Sandy Park on the weekend to see Saracens play?
Sadly, I'm not, because I've got a commitment down in the West Country. I do a lot of talks and presentations, so sadly, I'm not this time around. But I will be looking out for the result, and I expect to win.
Well, absolutely. Let's hope so, shall we? Yeah.
It's always nice. It's always nice to win against Exeter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those ones you look for, isn't it, every week? But let's talk about yourself, Floyd. And as I say, 469 games for Saracens, mainly during the 1980s. When did you make your debut, Floyd?
So, Jez, I played for Saracens for 10 seasons from 1980 to 1990. And what people forget is back then, certainly at the start of my career, you'd have a game every Saturday. You'd have matches many Sundays, and you'd also have some midweek matches as well.
Well, absolutely. I was 18 in 1990, was playing rugby from school into college, club rugby and everything. And I playing 4 or 5 games a season when you're 18, kind of like you think you could do it, and then you realise you pay for it later. I'm running a marathon this weekend in York, and my knees will be paying for it. And that's a lot to do with the amount of effort we put down there. But yeah, you came into rugby. Now, I alluded to it at the start, and we might as well hit this straight away. You come from a background that perhaps, certainly 1980, you didn't see many black players playing rugby. I remember, I think Chris Otey being the first black player playing for England that came came into my orbit, as it were. I mean, how did you get involved in the game yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jez. And I actually started playing rugby when I got to senior school, Kingsbury High School, a comprehensive school in northwest London, an ex-grammar school amalgamated with a secondary modern school, a very, very large school. We had a Welsh PE teacher, Brian Jones, and it was the first game session. And he lined all of the boys up, about 170 odd of us. We thought we were going to choose between rugby and football. He had other ideas. He looked us up and down, and he decided. And when it came to my turn, one of the smallest but quite broad shoulders, he pointed to rugby. And I was just gutted because, Northwest London, we all play football. But halfway through that first session, I just fell in love with the game. And, I was lucky that I was quite good at rugby. I was tough. I enjoyed the physical side of the game and I had the skills. And it was a Welsh PE teacher, a snap decision that got me into rugby. And I'm eternally grateful for that snap decision.
Well, that's amazing. It's quite similar to my story. I went to secondary school and didn't really know about rugby. 1983, I started at secondary school, played football, kept on getting sent off, and I had a Welsh PE teacher who was played for Wales B, Roy Lewis. He turned around and said, "You obviously have an enjoyment of causing pain on people, and perhaps you'd like to come and play rugby." And I ended up playing back row. Yeah, I mean it's great how you find that way in. But from your background, was rugby? I mean, you say rugby was never ever really on your radar. So, what was the reaction within your family, within your social group to you turning around and saying, I'm going to play rugby?
Well, I suppose, my story's different to most others, Jez, and you alluded at the start that it is different. And look, when I was a teenager, I wasn't at home. I was in the children's home. And so I was, sadly, my father was a bully, and I ran away from home when I was 10 for 3 weeks. And when I decided to go back with a policeman, my father decided that I wasn't going to stay in the home. He didn't want me. So I was put into care. So as a teenager, I grew up in care. And on the one hand, you're not in a family home environment, but on the other hand, I was in a loving environment with wonderful people and people that pushed me, and they could see that I enjoyed my rugby, and they pushed me and supported me to play rugby.
And did you find then that rugby became a family for you? I mean, the one thing we always talk about Saracens, particularly now in the professional era, under the stewardship of the Ray family and everything, is this whole idea of family, of belonging, that it's not just you as the player, it's your wife, it's your kids, whatever. I mean, did rugby union give you that as you grew up?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I would honestly say, Jez, that rugby was one of the points of continuity and stability for me. When you're from a broken home and you are constantly being told by people that you can't do certain things, primarily because of the colour of your skin. And you understand that if you respond in a certain way, you're just playing up to how they want you to. So I never, ever responded as the angry black man with a chip on my shoulder. I rose above that to just prove to people that I was good enough to do what they said I couldn't do it. And to your earlier point, look, when I got into rugby, there weren't many black boys in my school, but the Welsh PE teacher put most of us into the rugby team, which actually then became a very, very strong rugby team, actually one of the best in the county. And so that Welsh PE teacher, I think, was very, very smart in realising that these talented black boys could really strengthen the rugby team. And we did strengthen that rugby team. And it's interesting because I was successful in my rugby career. I would say that at least 2 or 3 of the other boys should have been, but didn't have perhaps the guidance, the direction that I was given, so dropped out when they potentially had just as much skill and ability as me.
Well, it's an interesting point you make there, and it's something that I've always talked about. And we're going away from the rugby world and perhaps looking at your later career in education. Personally, I live in a town in North Oxfordshire. I live on a former council estate. I go around when I'm doing my training runs and you see kids out on the street, whatever, like that. And it always amazes me that potentially the next captain of England rugby or the person who's got the cure for motor neurone disease associated that I run marathons for, or whatever, could be there on on that council estate, but because they're not given the opportunities and they're not given the guidance, you came through, but as you say, there's 3 or 4 lads who perhaps should have come through and didn't. I mean, how does that affect you later life in what you've done educationally and that you still do?
Yeah, I suppose, Jez, you're absolutely right. And one of my mantras since being a young teacher has always been, you can't be what you can't see. And let me give an example. And I'm going to ask you a question. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Apart from me, over the last 40 years, I want you to name another English-born black scrum half that's played Premiership level rugby.
English-born, oh, blimey.
Silence.
Well, I mean, again, I would probably have to go to Google to find it, and I'm not sure I would. I mean, you're going to tell me an answer, and I'm going to go, oh, yeah, I should have realised that. But yeah, go on.
Well, the answer, I believe, is none.
Yeah.
I mean, people say straight away a chap called Adwal Kardouni, who was Middle Eastern background, and I deliberately say black Afro-Caribbean background. And because, as I said, the mantra is you can't be what you can't see. Because when I was growing up and playing rugby, people were trying to push me out towards the wing. The black boys are fast. Stick them on the wing and they'll run around everyone. Or you had the big power forwards. Because when I went to Saracens, a man that just left Saracens and went to Wasp was a prop called Clint McGregor. Who was on the verge of getting England caps. And in the back in the day when you had the possibles v the probables, he was in the probables team, and one of the Gloucester props was playing for the possibles and destroyed him, and he lost out on an England cap. And he left Sarries as I joined Sarries. And I remember the other black guy that I knew that was playing at that level was a winger for Bedford called Bob Denham. Played for England B, but didn't quite play for England. And earlier you quite rightly said about Chris Oating, 1988. He actually was the second black man to play rugby for England. The first was Jimmy Peters back in 1906, Jez.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? And I mean, you always had the suspicion that if you're called Chris Oaty, the surname kind of perhaps gives an indication of your ethnic origins. If you're called Clint McGregor, is there somebody at the RFU going, well, maybe he's got Scottish blood or something like that? And, and it's when they suddenly see somebody turning up that, and it goes back to your comment, that you can't be, that racism that was around in the sport, and perhaps to a certain extent still remains in some parts. I mean, I remember playing, and as I say, I played throughout the 1990s, and we had a lad played rugby for us. He was an RAF pilot with the Queen's Flight, and we called him Spider. That was his nickname. It was perfectly innocent, in so much as I never put 2 and 2 together. And I'm a pretty politically, socially aware kind of guy growing up in that period of time. I never put 2 and 2 together and really thought about it. And I remember actually going down with Abingdon and Spider playing on the wing. And we played down in the Forest of Dean against a team in a cup match or something. And I remember Spider, who was a winger, and he was ridiculously quick, getting the ball into space. And we suddenly heard this big booming voice shout, "Get the," and it was the C word. And we went, wow. And we turned around, and it was the second row captain of the team we were playing. It was black as well. And it was like this acceptance that to be part of this group, you had to accept this casual racism.
Yeah, but we have to be careful, because I do a lot of talks and presentations, and I touch on this, Jez, and I say that one thing that we mustn't forget is language has changed and evolved over time. And language that was accepted in the 70s and 80s, some of it we know is not acceptable now. And I'll give you an easy example. 3 programs that when I was a schoolboy growing up, I hated. Love Thy Neighbour, On the Buses, Till Death Us Do Part. Yeah. The openly awful racist language was used not just on television, but I'd go into school and classmates would call me that. Now, that doesn't make my classmates racist at all. That was language that was accepted back then. So we've got to be careful, because there are times when people use language because it's deemed to be accepted, but it doesn't mean that they're a racist. Did that make sense, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all to do with education, isn't it? And understanding and being prepared to listen to people's experience and learn from that. I mean, as I say, I grew up in a small village in Oxfordshire, We had one black kid who was a adopted child of a local family who he took all sorts of abuse. And you sit there now looking back at it and you think, God, that, but then it was the 1970s, and you just think how awful it is. And it's so amazing now that we can move on and we can see people, black people or people from other cultures and whatever, are seen just because now, I mean, we'll look at someone, one of your proteges, I suppose, Maro Itoje. He is looked upon as an athlete first, nothing more than that. Now, he is very aware of his origins. He's very proud of his origins. You can see that. It drives him. It's part of him. But it doesn't define him, does it? I think is what I'm trying to say.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I think that shows how society's moved on. Some people say, oh, we need to move at a faster pace. But my response is, you know what? Society's really moved on. Just look back to the 1970s and 1980s and what I had to put up with as a boy and as a teenager and as a young man. Now, teenagers and young black men and brown men and women don't have to put up with the same things. But be careful, because it's not all just racist abuse. A lot of it was just language that was accepted back then, behaviors that were accepted back then that we now understand aren't accepted. And so, I'm very, very mindful. I don't just call everything, oh, that's racist. And I'll give you an excellent example. I don't mention the team, but because we're talking to a rugby audience, they will know that there are only 4 big teams in the West Country. And the first time I was made captain, and I led my team out against this big team. And as I led my team out, there were monkey chants, because it wasn't just football. I had the monkey chants. People were screaming and shouting, abused. But the comment that I remembered, someone shouts out, gosh, there were 3 of them. And that meant that Saracens had the temerity to select 3 black players. And my response, well done to Saracens, because Saracens looked beyond the racism. They picked the players that they thought could do the job. And I've always been grateful to Saracens, because bearing in mind, I was the first black elite scrum half. And I know that the Saracens board at that time would have been put under pressure to select someone else. I was the first black captain of a major rugby team. Again, the board had faith in me. So well done to them. So they've been trailblazers in their own way.
Well, it is remarkable, isn't it? Because when you think about it, that, just because of the colour of your skin does not make any difference to your ability to do something. And if you're a organisation that's looking at a large percentage of your potential assets and saying, well, just because he's that colour, I'm not going to pick him, is ridiculous. I mean, it takes me back. I mean, we mentioned it last couple of weeks ago. Ed Griffiths, who's former Saracens CEO, who was a CEO of South Africa when they won the World Cup in 1995, and he was asked, what are the 2 best, the worst thing he did and the best thing he did. The worst thing he did was they never sacked all the players, but the best thing they did was they took the World Cup into the townships and showed the black kids in Soweto or wherever that rugby was a game that they could play. And now you look at that South African side and you look at the Willemse, you've got your Cheslin Colbys, the guy, there's so many black players have come through in the South African rugby. And, this is the country that 30 years ago was the most racist country in the world.
Mm-hmm. And it's the power of, remember, you can't be what you can't see. That's the power. And the current generation of South African rugby players, all colours, are going to inspire the next generation. And that's why people like Maro are so important, because he will inspire so many people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is so important. I mean, the last question about your playing career, though, Floyd, is, I mean, how difficult is it for you to be the first, as it were? Because you didn't have anybody who looks like you to look up to. But if you were, say, for argument's sake, I'm thinking of high-profile black players that followed you, the likes of Steve Ajomo or Victor Abugu at Bath, for instance, they've got somebody there who's blazed that trail. I mean, do you see yourself as a trailblazer? Do you see yourself as an inspiration?
It's interesting you say that, Jess, because when you're a young player, no, you don't. You just see yourself as a player, and you just want to play to the best of your ability and get to the highest standard that you think you're capable of. And when people were trying to put me down and saying, "Well, you shouldn't be playing in that position because black players can't," I'm just like, "Yes, I can. I think I'm good enough," and you prove them wrong. Because in life, we've all got choices to make. You know, we're all gonna have setbacks, and what do you do? Do you just accept the setback or do you fight against it? I've always had the resilience to say, actually, I think I can do this. I think I am better than what you're trying to say. So when I was a young player, I didn't see myself as a trailblazer. I just wanted to play rugby, play scrum half, play for Saracens, play to the best of my ability. And it's only now looking back and thinking about some of the challenges that I had, I thought, yeah, actually, it was quite hard and I'm proud of my achievements.
Well, of course, I mean, the next point to come from that, Floyd, is that obviously when you played, rugby was an amateur game. So you had to have a 9 to 5 job to pay the bills. You went into education. And once you finished playing, you continued your career in education. And I suppose it's at that point that you truly do become inspirational because you've grown up, you've matured, you become an adult, you've had all those life experiences, and then suddenly you've got kids in front of you that you can inspire. I mean, how important was it to you that you did that? Is it, and that become a driver in your later life?
You know, it was hugely important, and part of the drive was that I was determined to give children the opportunities that I never had. You know, because I was basically beaten up by my father. I was kicked out of the house by my father after running away. And I was determined that I wanted youngsters to feel that they could achieve their potential. Because despite of the challenges that I faced, I feel that I achieved my potential. And because I achieved my potential, what did it do? It gave me choices and it opened doors. And I know that there are so many youngsters, girls and boys, that if they can just work hard and have someone behind them supporting them, maybe it could open doors for them. It could give them choices the way it's done for me. That makes sense, Jez?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I mean, I'm currently watching Ted Lasso, the TV series about football, and there's one character in there, Jamie Tart, who has a relationship with a father who is abusive, and that he's achieved, and he's playing Premiership football. And I know this is just fiction and everything. He plays for England and everything. But the subset is about how he is doing this almost in spite of his father. And everything he's achieved, you know, and there's one beautiful part where Ted Lasso, the manager, turns around and says, you can do this because you're doing it because you want to, you know, prove something to your dad, but you need to forgive your dad and then you'll move on. Do you ever sit down and think, did your dad ever see what you achieved? Do you think your dad was ever proud, or did you just have to move on from that?
Well, I had to move on, Jez, because he kicked me out when I was 10. And apart from a very, very brief period when I was 18 and I needed him to sign some forms for me to go off to university, I never ever saw him again. And I felt that he wasn't there for me when I really needed my father. So I'm going to have to get on with my own life. But importantly, I've got 3 grown-up sons, and as they've been growing up, I've always been there for them because I don't want them to go through what I went through when I was a young man. The other thing that I think is important, Jez, is that for those of us that are fortunate enough to be relatively successful in our lives and our careers, I truly believe that we have a responsibility to give something back, however we do it. And I'll give you a simple idea. So I've been lucky enough to be headmaster of 4 independent prep schools. Again, not many people that look like me work in independent prep schools, let alone becoming the boss. And in one of those schools, I set up something called Random Acts of Kindness Week. And there was a week where at the start of the week, we all pulled a name out of the hat, teachers and students. And every day we had to do something or say something kind to the person that we pulled out of the hat. Simple example. I now live in West Cornwall, and 2 or 3 times a week, I'll pop down to local cafes. They all know me. And sometimes if I see an old person there by themselves having lunch or having a coffee, I will just quietly go up and I'll pay. I won't tell them because I don't want any praise out of it. And then I'll just leave the cafe. And then they'll obviously find out later on. It's just little things like that, just giving back because we can give back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such an important, when we look at the world as it is at the moment. Why can't we just love instead of fight? I suppose is something, and that comes through from you. Now, I mean, Floyd, we'll come to the end of this chat, which has been absolutely fascinating. But you mentioned there you're down in West Cornwall. Bit of a difference from London, it has to be said. I mean, you've retired, although I know you do. You still keep your finger in pies, don't you? And you do bits and pieces. And of course, you wrote your biography a couple of years ago, which is a fantastic read. But I mean, why West Cornwall? What took you down there, and what's life now like for Floyd and his family?
Do you know, Jeff, that's a really important question to ask me because when I was a young man at University Bow Road College, I met and fell in love with a young woman from West Cornwall, Denise Figgins, that she was. And she was in this little village just outside of Penzance. And I first came down here back in 1979. West Cornwall was a different place since then, but there were still not many people that looked like me. But I've loved coming back down with my wife to visit her family, and then brought my boys, and each year would come down 2 or 3 times a year. And we didn't see it as going on holiday. We were visiting relatives. And to talk bluntly, because of what happened in my family, my wife's family became my family, and they were actually fantastic and incredibly welcoming and warm. Very, very tragically, I lost my wife to cancer 7 years ago. And I need to tell you a little bit more about how she's influenced me. So about 16 years ago, she was the only person that knew my story, knew the whole journey, the challenges. You know, people knew snippets, friends knew snippets, family knew snippets, but they did not know the whole story. Even my sons didn't know the whole story until I gave them the manuscript a month before it went to the printers. And 16 years ago, she said, Floyd, you've got to write a book because your story is such an inspirational, it's different, it will inspire people. And at the time I said, there's no point, there's no chance, I don't know where to start. And then I lost her to cancer, and there were literally 12 brutally short, intense weeks from the diagnosis at the end of August until I lost her in the middle of November. And the first thing I did is I promised her that I was going to do this book and dedicate it to her. So if anyone's got my book, if you open to the first page, it's a dedication to my wife. Because she also said all of those years ago, when you write the book, Floyd, you're going to call it A Week One Summer because you ran away from home a week one summer. But about, 10 years ago, when we started to talk about, what are we going to do for the next phase of our lives together when the boys graduate and grow up and leave the nest, we decided that we wanted to sell up in London and move down to the West Country. There's a family down here, and I didn't have any family in London, so to speak. And when I lost her, I took some time to reflect, and I thought, you know what, we've already made the decision. I'm going to follow it through. So here I am in a little village just outside of Penzance in the West Country.
Well, Floyd, I mean, one thing I'm going to say, and you can poo-poo this all you like or anything like that. A few years ago, I wrote a blog for a friend of mine about the hard men of rugby, and it was quite interesting because what I did was I turned around Richard Hill, hard man of rugby. Jack Berger tackles walls with his head, a hard man of rugby. But being a hard man of rugby is not just about what goes on the pitch, I don't think. And you definitely are there because it's about bravery, and it's not about just bravery looking at a 17-stone prop running at you and saying, I'm going to tackle you as a scrum half. It's about fronting up to prejudices. It's about fronting up to challenges that are different to everybody else's and challenges that you've had for your life. And I think you, Floyd, have typified that. And not only have you typified that, but you also typified for me what rugby is all about. And, I personally, we do a thing where we make certain players club cult legends. The players that perhaps should have played for England or their country, should have got greater what's the word I'm looking for? Greater awareness.
Recognition.
Whatever. Yeah. And everybody in the world should know about Floyd Steadman, OBE, as a rugby player, first and foremost, but a trailblazing rugby player. And I have to say that your honesty and your openness to sit down and talk to us about things that are obviously quite difficult and, It's been absolutely wonderful, and I have absolutely loved this chat so much, Floyd. So I will say, on behalf of everybody who listens to the Fezcast, everybody within the Saracens family, thank you for being who you were as a player, who you were as an educator, and who you were as a man and a person. I do recommend you read your book. It is absolutely fantastic, and learn more.
Thank you. Jez, that's so kind of you, and I really appreciate that. Can I just say one last thing? And that is, when people say to me, how have you managed to survive and be relatively successful? And I say, look, I've worked hard from being a young man to focus on kindness, empathy, resilience, and hard work. And if we can just promote those things, wouldn't the world be a better place?
Well, absolutely, Floyd, absolutely. And yeah, I'm putting you up there now to be one of the people to lead the world in the future, even if it's just by example and attitude. Floyd, thank you ever so much for joining us on the Fezcast. It's been an absolute joy talking to you. And obviously, if anybody ever sees you at the StoneX, buy you a pint, obviously, or whatever, or a coffee. And
I do like a West Indian rum.
Don't we all? Yes, absolutely. But yeah, no. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you for everything you've done for the Saracens and for the wider world. And we wish you all the best down in West Cornwall. And if we're ever passing, we'll wave at you as we go past.
You're very welcome. And as I said to the supporters, I do try and get up to the StoneX. Probably only 4 or 5 times a year, but I do try and get up there. So if people want to sort of just stop me and have a chat, I'm always happy to talk to people.
Right, absolutely. I certainly will do, because I think there's more and more to talk about with you, and I would love to do that. So, but thank you ever so much, Floyd, and we'll hand back now to the guys to finish off the show this week.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
You are listening to the Fezcast, which is proudly sponsored by the Saracen Supporters Association, and I'm Alison Davis, one of the SSA committee. For a £10 annual subscription, the SSA provides our members with monthly newsletters, virtual and in-person player events, away match ticket allocations, and we organise pre-match gatherings at away matches. We sponsor men's and women's players, and we support the Saracens Foundation Track Club on behalf of our members. On top of all that, every year we have a seasonal SSA badge, which is exclusive to members. Where else can you get that much value for a tenner? Join now at membermojo.co.uk/SSA, or come and see us on match day in the Oasis at the StoneX.
This is the Fezcast.
I mean, I'm sticking my hand up in the air here. I'm going to be biased because I did the interview, but I thought that was a pretty damn good interview. And Floyd was an absolutely wonderful guest. The stuff that he came out with, and the way that he kept it, as a player, I think, who came through, and he would have been subjected to a level. He had to do things so much better than everybody else, and he holds no rancor for that. He just got on and did it. He's a credit to himself, also a credit to the game, Matt.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you don't need me to explain why, but we've spoken to Maggie Alfonsi and now Floyd Steadman, who have both had relatively similar stories, and have both spoken to us, and it's just incredible to me, the sort of humility they both have and how sort of grounded they are despite everything that they've faced over their career and over their lives, and what they've actually achieved post that. Both just incredible. So for Floyd, yeah, I'd just urge everyone who's been a Saracens fan for less time than, well, you have, Jez, just have a look back at, and try and look back at the amateur days of Saracens. It's a very difficult thing to do because history seems to be wiped a little bit occasionally, but take a trip to Bramley Road and just look at some of the pictures and the memorabilia and things that are around there, and Floyd's place in that, because it is definitely something. And yeah, fantastic interview.
Yeah, and indeed, and I think what came out of it as well is that legacy of the amateur game that perhaps you don't get anymore, Barry, in so much as that those players like Floyd Steadman had to hold down jobs whilst playing rugby at the very highest level. And, you think of the famous ones, Tim Rodber at Northampton Saints being in the army. There were certain clubs where you went along and you got jobs in the city and basically turned up and had a lunch every now and then. But other people did actually have to work bloody hard. Mike Teague at Gloucester. The famous story of him was that you used to walk along Kingsholm and you'd see Teague on the top of a building laying a few bricks. You'd think, oh, he'll not be playing this afternoon. And suddenly he'd be turning up an hour later to play. And, Floyd, his career in education. And, when people like Maro Itoje still refer to him as Mr. Steadman, they don't, he's not Floyd. He's Mr. Steadman. The respect that he has gained just through being a brilliant person is quite amazing.
Not only a top rugby player, but as you say, clearly an influential and an inspiring teacher throughout his career outside of rugby. And we talk a lot about mental strength of professional sports people. The mental strength of both Maggie and Floyd to put up with everything they had to put up with as they were playing the game must be incredible people.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that interview we did with him. And indeed, what I would urge you also to do is to have a look on the RFU YouTube site, because last week they put out a video all about Floyd's life, which giving him the recognition, perhaps a little bit too late, Matt. I don't know. But better late than never. You look at players that they should have been applauded and revered when they played, and yet we have to wait 30 odd years for them to get that recognition. But the recognition is important, and I'm sure you'll put up the links on the Fezcast Twitter. I'll do it on the Facebook page. But yeah, go and have a look at that video. It's quite amazing, isn't it, Matt?
It is, yeah. They cram an awful lot into 12 or 13 minutes, to be honest. And like I say, Maro Itoje features quite heavily in that video, and you can see firsthand just the respect that Maro has for Floyd Steadman, as does John Buckton, another legend of Saracens in the amateur days, and just he is very, very highly regarded. So yeah, definitely have a look at that. We'll make sure we put a few links up.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to Floyd for doing that for us. Thanks, Ronnie, for at the club for putting me in touch with Floyd as well. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Absolutely fantastic. Now, we need to finish off this week's show and talk about the quarterfinals, and obviously mention the fact that, obviously, as ever, you look at that World Cup trophy, and still the only Northern Hemisphere side you'll see on there is England, with France, Ireland and Wales all going out at the quarterfinal stages. Shall we take it in order? Go Wales, Argentina first. I'll say number one. Feel a little bit sorry for Wales. They lost a couple of key players, didn't they, in the before the game and then during the game. But Argentina have really grown into this tournament, Barry.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at their performance in their first game, obviously, which was against England, you wonder how we've got two sides from Group D through into the semi-finals. But Argentina were just very good on Saturday. They stuck at it. They wore the Welsh down. They were, as you say, a little bit fortunate with a couple of injuries and a couple of players missing, but they just stuck at it, kept in the game, and when it came to it, got the break of that intercept try.
Absolutely. That was a piece of absolute brilliance from a very old head in Nicolas Sanchez, who absolutely read it. What I will say is, and this is what we'll bring this back to Saracens, what was quite interesting, I felt, seeing Nick Tompkins, who is still at international level, reasonably inexperienced, particularly if you look at the likes of Dan Bigger and George North around him. But for him to go to Sam Costello, put his arm around him and just tell him, mate, shit happens, because that's what it was. He was just burgled by a very, very canny operator that 9 times out of 10, that to come off, Wales down the other end, scored a try, and they're in the semi-finals. So it's really good to see Nick Tompkins understanding, through his own disappointment. And I think that does come from that Saracens kind of ethos, as it were, that, I would imagine that Owen Farrell's done that for Nick Tompkins on occasion, or Alex Gooder's done it on occasion, and he's returned that favour to a young lad who's got a bright future in the game, I think, Sam Costello. But, that was really good of him, Matt.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're quite right. All of Saracens' success has always come after a pretty harrowing loss in a final or something like that. So yeah, the likes of Nick Tompkins and things, his experience at club level has probably paid dividends there. And I agree with you, Sam Costello is potentially the real future at 10 for Wales. And yeah, a result that, in fact, all four results really could have gone either way, swinging on one moment really. So it's been a great set of quarterfinals. We'll talk about the other three.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about Ireland, because, the Ireland game, we see the end of a career. We saw an end of a career with Wales, with Dan Biggar, and another 10 bowed out of the game. Johnny Sexton. Johnny Sexton on the weekend had a goddamn awful game. Sorry, going to say it. I know it was his last game, but all he did was take the ball, pivot and pass it. He made New Zealand's defensive job so easy, because you could predict exactly what he was going to do every time. And Johnny Sexton went out doing what Johnny Sexton does best, which was whinge and flap his arms around and moan at the referee, instead of getting on and grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck and playing like he can play. And he's done it in finals. He did it against us, Saracens, in the Leinster final in 2019. He's done it in big Irish games in the past where it really matters. And, Matt's going to disagree with me here, because both Ireland and France performed brilliantly in their quarterfinals in phases. But when it came down to it, they made mistakes at the crucial moments and did the wrong things at the crucial moments. And I call it choking. Matt will disagree with me. But there is an element. These guys are playing at the very highest level of international sport. And I personally expect them to be able to cope with those pressures. And France and Ireland didn't, I didn't think, at key moments. Go on, Matt. Have your 5 minutes, and then we'll call it a draw.
I think choking is the extreme end of things. I think there is a big differentiation between bottling a match and just losing it. But actually, I do think Ireland will rue quite a lot from that game. I think there was quite a lot. I think they kind of got sucked into the way that New Zealand wanted them to play, is probably the best way I can think of putting it. So yeah, on another day, I think they might have done things a bit differently. And I do agree with you, Johnny Sexton. I think he had not one of his better days really. But at the same time, it's the All Blacks, and I think the worst thing that could possibly have happened for every other team at the World Cup is they lose their first match against France, because you look at it and go, well, they won't make that mistake again. It's New Zealand. So yeah, it could have gone either way. But yeah, I think Ireland could have been better, definitely.
Well, absolutely. The other 2 points there to make is mention Sam Cane, and I'm going to mention him in correlation to Owen Farrell, who we'll talk about a bit later on. But Sam Cane is a player who is disrespected in his own country, ridiculously so, because he is a fine player. His problem is he followed Richie McCaw, and it's very difficult to follow such a legend of the game. The second person I want to mention that game is Wayne Barnes, because Wayne Barnes has taken an awful lot of grief. There's probably a contract out on Wayne Barnes from some Dublin low life at the moment. But Wayne Barnes refereed that game brilliantly. He did 2 things. He obviously stole Josh van der Fleer's cloak of invisibility, and he refereed Andrew Porter correctly at scrum time. And this is where I talk about not being able to make the right decisions and do the right things. He was clear in what he expected from scrum time and at the breakdown. And Ireland, because they've got away with it for 3-4 seasons, just didn't react to that. Just whether they didn't, couldn't, or wouldn't change the way that they were playing to get on side with Wayne Barnes, I do not know. But Wayne Barnes made it clear how he was going to referee that game. And Ireland decided to ignore him. And instead of doing something about it, waved their arms about and complained to him. It was never going to change. And Wayne Barnes refereed that game brilliantly well, Barry.
Yeah, it wasn't the smartest play you'll ever see from a prop. You're right. Wayne said, he told him what he was doing. He told him what he was seeing, and he just carried on painting the same picture. And clearly, in the vague hope that Wayne Barnes had stopped looking at that, at what was going on. But yeah, that was bizarre. Ireland will be not to take anything away from New Zealand, Ireland will be very, very disappointed with that performance from several players. They just never really quite got going, and they never really managed to keep New Zealand at arm's length the way they have done in the past and the way they did with Scotland the week before.
Well, I think this is the one fading perhaps of Andy Farrell as coach of Ireland here. And this is a conversation I got involved with Mike Bubbins, the Welsh comedian, rugby fan, and a couple of other people were saying, who would you have at standoff for the Lions? And they say, you've got to be Johnny Sexton. I say, Johnny Sexton's 38. He's going to plunge off of a cliff. And the fact is that cliff is coming closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And I think he plunged off that cliff in that game. He just wasn't at the races. And when you're 38 years old, that can happen. It happened to Kieran Reid in the 2019 World Cup, even though he managed to keep going for another couple of years. Alan Wynne-Jones plunged off the cliff about 5 years ago and still managed to get 50-odd caps extra than what he should have done. Sergio Parisi, for instance, could walk back into that Italian side without any problems whatsoever, but he won't because he knows that he can't compete at that level anymore. So, it is interesting when you look at Owen Farrell. How many years has Owen Farrell got at England? I think potentially he's got 4 or 5 years. He's still only 32, isn't he? But, it's looking at him and saying, when's that going to happen? Saracens did it with Brad Barrett. We all knew, we said this before, Brad Barrett could probably give us another season. But they had that conversation and he decided to move on before it became an issue. It's, it's the Muhammad Ali, the boxer who goes on too fast syndrome, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it is. And everyone's different. Some players will retire at their peak, others will keep going and going and going. Others will keep going until they're 50 and turn out for old piss poor Ian's third 15. I don't know.
Well, let's move on to the French game. And Matt, perhaps I'm being slightly unfair in saying that France choked in a game where there was lots and lots of quality. I think my biggest issue was that in key moments, France made bad decisions. Some players didn't play to that very high time, but he just wasn't at the games, I didn't think. And Anton Dupont, he's come back from injury. It's a hard thing to do. But, when they needed a clear head and doing the right things, they didn't quite do it. Like, they kicked for goal instead of kicking down and with a line-out that was going so well. Just small things, which means, that affected the way they played, Matt.
Some of the mistakes that crept into France's game over the course of the second half, it was just testament to the way that South Africa were playing, the amount of pressure that they were putting them under. I mean, aside from, I've never seen a penalty kick go backwards before. That is a first for me. That's probably the biggest howler of the whole game and potentially the whole World Cup. But look, we're skipping ahead a little bit by me saying this for the England game, but it was incredible, the pace and the quality of particularly the first half of that game. Both France and South Africa just looked streets ahead of most other teams around the world, and it was pretty scary. But France, in the end, they sort of had to chase the game a little bit, but it still could have flipped on one or two decisions that were made. I mean, I'm the last one that wants to criticise a referee, but the final penalty for South Africa that Pollard kicked from the halfway line, personally, should have gone the other way. He's about 3 foot over the top of the ball, and that should have been a France penalty, and potentially it's a 6-point swing. But there's probably 1,000,001 incidents over the course of the game. No doubt anyone South African is probably picking away at anyway. But yeah, pretty good, I think. But yeah, absolutely fantastic match. Barry, you probably agree with me there as well.
Yeah, it's a great game. I mean, as good as we thought Ireland-New Zealand was on the Saturday, I mean, we didn't have to wait long for a game that eclipsed even that. I mean, there was certainly bits and pieces you could look at. I mean, de Klerk box kicking with 90 seconds to go or whatever it was, and people were saying, why has he done that? Well, the answer was because they were sealing off at every ruck and they realised they weren't going to get away with it forever. But yeah, there's always bits you can look at. I mean, we looked again at today. I saw something on social media about Etzebet's knock on that wasn't given as a knock on because the referee said he knocked it backwards. Well, the angle I've just seen today, he didn't. But there we go. So these things happen. But yeah, what an intense match of matchup that was. Great game of rugby to watch. Great for a neutral. I mean, if I'd been a South African or a Frenchman, I'd probably have been dead by the end of it.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, talking about intensity, I think we have to say the intensity England-Fiji was up there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going around saying, well, England, had the easiest quarterfinal, whatever. They didn't. Fiji are a bloody good size. And, England's made them look ordinary first half, mainly due to the fact that the game was being controlled at number 10 by Owen Farrell, who is the best number 10, despite him being booed by his own fans. I say that in inverted commas because, quite frankly, he's the most disrespected bloke. I mentioned Sam Cane. Owen Farrell is a great player. No two ways about it. And when he plays at 10, England tick. And England ticks against Fiji. To the extent that Matt Dawson's written an article this week for the BBC Sport and has gone through it and not managed to say, really sorry, Owen, I got that one wrong. He had occasions where he had runs, he had occasions where he kicks, and he had occasions where he put Manu Tuilagi into space, at pace, bam, bam, bosh. Thank you very much. Joe Marchant's try, Manu Tuilagi's try came from Owen Farrell. And I'm afraid to say, we need to start appreciating this bloke because James Wiles written a great article for Planet Rugby about him and say how you'll miss him because he potentially's got the game that could take England and make South Africa work. Now, I don't think England are going to beat South Africa. I don't think anyone in the world thinks England are going to beat South Africa, but they've got a puncher's chance. And that's all you could hope for. And you've got to hope that you make South Africa work and that they have to work as hard as they did to beat France, to beat England. And I think the way this team has developed and the way that they are now playing to a specific game plan that you could see is working, they will make South Africa work, if nothing else.
They will give South Africa a game and South Africa won't have it all their own way. They'll start as massive favourites on Saturday and rightly so, looking at the performances over the quarterfinals and probably over the group games as well. But yeah, you're right. England have got a chance. They've certainly got more of a chance than anyone who's already got on the plane and gone home. So let's get behind them. I don't understand booing players who are playing for your own country. I mean, we can all quibble about selections, and we all have, and we all will continue to do for until time immemorial. But let's get behind everyone. Let's give them the best support that we can from the pub or from the Stonex or from wherever you're watching it on Saturday, and let's hope that that something falls our way and we get through to a final again.
I was going to say, you're looking at it from our angle as a Saracens podcast and Saracens fans. I mean, our equivalent is we do put Marcus Smith down quite a lot because he's the competition for Owen Farrell's space, and this is a bizarre thing to do, really. I think he had, to be honest, not a great game against Fiji, but he was thrown in at 15 to be absolutely battered. And you know what? He didn't play that well, really, but he fronted up massively. And I'm not going to sit here and boo him. Why would I do that? It's such a stupid way of going about that. That's not a proper England fan. I do think from what a few people have said that potentially there was actually a quite a large contingent of French fans who were also getting involved in booing certain players, so that maybe did play a part in a little bit. But yeah, it's a bit sad, really. I
will say about Marcus Smith, actually, the one thing you want from a player is to try, and one in attack he tried.
Yep,
and it didn't come off a lot, but he tried. But more importantly, in defence, he tried. Too many times I've seen Marcus Smith act like a saloon door. He didn't. The one where Semi Radradra tried running over him and did run over him, and Owen Farrell came in like an Exeter missile from the side. But Marcus Smith put his body there and slowed him up and, stopped him getting a head of steam up. And fair dues to him, he showed bravery. And, I mean, he took a fearful whack. We'll mention Saracens players on the game. Jamie George did 80 minutes. I mean, he is going to be absolutely looking forward to a beach holiday very soon. That's number one. Number two, Maro Itoje, obviously been on the phone to George Cruz during the week, I think, because that sacking tactic at the line-out was absolutely brilliant, but straight out of George Cruz playbook. And I will be very interested to know whether George Cruz has had any influence upon that. And actually, he would be someone that I would be bringing into the England coaching setup pretty quick if he has had that influence. But the one player we have to mention more than anybody else is Ben Earl. And it's another nail in my Eddie Jones coffin. Eddie Jones told us all that Ben Earl was too small to play international rugby. Well, Ben Earl's value has gone skywards whilst Eddie Jones's has plummeted. And, if there's an epitaph for Eddie Jones as England coach, him not picking Ben Earl is the one, because quite frankly, Ben Earl's been one of the players of the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had a storming game at the weekend. 99 meters, I think, off 9 carries. I think it was the actual stat. And that one at the end, I just wish he'd managed to put a kick in or something and collect it and gallop in under the posts. But he was so close to going 3/4 of the length of the pitch and dotting it down that he deserves all the plaudits he's got. I mean, Owen was given the official man of the match at the game, but I'm not quite sure how they've overlooked Ben for that. But yeah, you could have made a case for probably 4 or 5 of the England players. Mauro was looking somewhere back to his best. Courtney Laws had a cracking game. They all fronted up. They all stood up, and they all deserve immense credit for that. And for they played their best game as they've gone through the tournament. They've got better. They've slowly got better, I think, and hopefully they can go on one further step on the weekend.
One, South Africa have had a huge match against France, and whether they confront that back up and repeat that is going to be moved. It'd take a very special team to be able to play at that level 6 days later, number one. Number two, as you say, England have improved, have got better, and have seemingly found the lineup that perhaps Steve Borthwick wanted to do at the start of the tournament. And also, what I think he's also done great is that he's pulled in these older players who've got experience. So we've got leaders across the field. Johnny May's another one I'm going to give special attention to, because I thought he had a really good game for England. His best England game for a long time. But with the fact that these guys have got experience, know what to do in these situations. Well, they could do it as well as they did 3-4 years, which is why I would be tempted to pick Billy Villapolo at 8 and move Ben Earl to 7 game. One, he gives you a bit of extra grunt, and 2, he's got that leadership experience and that big game experience. So, plenty for Borthwick to ponder, but I think England have gone in the right direction. And as I said to you last week, Barry, a semi-final is a success for England, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying we wouldn't get out of the group. So to have got out the group, topped it, and then gone on to win the quarterfinal is probably a reasonable level for us. We do need to step up this weekend, but I'm sure everyone will be fighting for that shirt in training this week, and those that are selected as part of the 15 or the wider 23 will be giving it everything they've got come Saturday evening.
Indeed. Well, look, there's plenty to look forward to there. Next week, I think, Matt, I'm going to ask you to do all the bits and pieces, because it's my stepdaughter's wedding next weekend. Gemma's getting married to Andy on Saturdays, so I will be missing rugby. Plus, I'm going to have my feet up after running a 42-minute personal best. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier on, but I did do a 42-minute personal best in the marathon. So I managed to run the York Marathon in 4 hours, 27:46, which... as I say, is not world record pace, but world record pace for me. Thank you to everybody who supported me on the charity, though. I got a fair few donations through, so thanks for that. But then, we're going to be back on the 25th of October, and I think, Matt, and whoever you can drag out of the ether to talk about the semi-finals and everything next week, then.
Yeah, we'll see what we can put together, and congratulations on your marathon run. It's almost as under the length of time of one of your monologues now, so you're nearly there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's how I work out what I'm going to say, Matt, is when I'm running and pounding the streets. But yeah, thanks, Barry. Thanks, Matt, and indeed, thanks to Floyd Steadman for joining us for that fantastic interview in the middle there. And as I say, we'll say all the best, folks, and look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Good for listening.
This is the Fezcast.